Good afternoon, and I think we can still say Happy New Year. We're still in January. My name's Jude. I'm going to be looking at ways to document evidence for ISO standard 9001-2015 with you this afternoon. These slides will be sent to you at the end of the webinar, as well as this recording as well. And so you can browse through these slides at your leisure to have confidence that you're being provided with a webinar from a global certification body, and you can sort of check where we're up to in the world with the standards that we deliver. So the objectives of the webinar is to learn how to, or catch up on how to create a lean ISO 9001-2015 system without unnecessary paperwork. Where does the standard require documented information? And we've listened to what our customers said, really. We want to help the workforce be more efficient by reducing the documented information, but how do we still evidence the requirements and still show that to an auditor? And then the final part of the webinar will look at where to start when considering reducing and updating your system and how to get on with important planning. So, real-time effective systems, whether it's the best of times or the worst of times, it's the only time we've got. So everybody, I think, is still in a little bit of a state of change at the moment. Doesn't look like the dreaded COVID is going away anytime soon. And of course, what we're all experiencing, I think, at the moment, is a significant amount of staff are working from home, and it's still quite new, isn't it? So you'll be having your audits remotely still, and we may see a bit of a scattering of employees. So it's quite important to say, well, how is our quality management system still effective? And it's likely, from what we've been seeing daily for years now, and identified a few issues on the remote audits, is that you've probably got a quality manual, which isn't really required. You've probably got a written policy within the manual or a notice board. Who reads it? And folders of written procedures and flowcharts on the walls. We've got to ask, are these effective? You've probably got management review minutes. Are they put in a folder until next year? And you've possibly got a non-conformance register. How's it now managed? And you should have internal audits. And we've got to consider, are they utilised or is it a burden? So these documents that we're talking about are generally paper-based for quite a few companies. And if we're not all in the office at the same time, the natural question to ask is, how are they getting utilised? Presumably, we haven't all got folders of quality manuals and procedures and flowcharts all over our offices at home. And if we have, how are we controlling those documents? So currently, obviously, we're using software at the moment to deliver this webinar, really, aren't we? And I would imagine a lot of you are using Teams, emails, phones, Hangouts, WhatsApp. And it might be a consideration that you haven't yet thought of, that you might want to put your entire quality management system through these methods. It doesn't make too much sense, really, to have loads of paperwork all over the place and about if that's not the method of communication that we're currently using. So can you imagine what time could be saved by not having to search through arduous files and loads of paper taking up the office and just gathering dust, really? And at least if you're using a software, perhaps, you can have total document control, all from one administrator, beg your pardon. So documents are really pretty, and often we might see a big hefty folder and think someone's worked really, really hard on that, and often they have. But there's a lot of time wasting documents as well that we seem to spend a lot of lot of time creating, updating, and then we miss updating it, and then an auditor will come in and say, well, you haven't updated your system effectively, you get a finding. It's all a little bit of a nuisance, really, isn't it? Most of your manual, if you choose to have one, can be done efficiently, visually, and communicated simply by reducing the duplication and the waffle. And I can certainly tell you that what we see daily, I should say, is that the manual which is generally presented to us doesn't provide too much information at all. In fact, a lot of the time, it's almost a direct copy and paste from the standard. And I've just popped a little example for you here. So you might find that your manual is probably quite similar to this, and it's okay if it is, because we're looking at how we can get around it. So we've established, implemented, maintain and continually improve a quality management system, including processes needed, interactions in accordance with the requirements of this international standard. And generally what we'll see is we is replaced for, well, either stays as we or it's a company name. But actually I've only changed a few words around there from the actual standard itself to make it sound as if I've written it or my company has written it. So looking at that in itself, I think what we might be able to conclude is it doesn't actually tell us anything, because the standard tells you what is required, doesn't tell you how to do it, which is quite an important thing, really, because if you think your quality system is meant to be communicated and understood by the users, and we're meant to be able to sort of check their awareness, for want of a better way of putting it, it would be very, very difficult for somebody who is not well versed in ISO to sort of look at this and say, oh, right, okay, I know exactly what this means and exactly what my role in this is. Which takes you to the point of, it really means it's a little bit ineffective, very pretty, lots of work gone into it. So it appears, but in fact, it's not. It's a copy and paste, and it doesn't tell us how you do anything, which is really quite important. So how would you replace the aged, old, loved quality manual that has been around since probably quality management systems have? Well, there's lots of things we can do. We can create a poster. So it's easily done, it's visual, it's informative, it doesn't take up lots of storage on your laptop or your desktop. And once we all get back to normal, hopefully, and we can all be back into an office or a warehouse or a shop, it's easily even just put up in a staff room where everybody's going to congregate and get a cup of tea, and hopefully, you know, we'll possibly pay a little bit more attention to it than if we had a big lever arch file or, you know, a few page document in a plastic wallet in a drawer on a shelf somewhere. You can possibly look at going, you know, quite Gucci and get a dashboard on software. So of course there is a cost implication to getting specific software, which if you're working off your laptop or your desktop all the time, that might be suitable for you. They are becoming more and more popular. I've certainly seen a lot of consultants have started using this as a method for the company to have their entire system in one place where they use it, and try to make it more relevant to what it is that you do as a business. And generally what they have is, you know, the policy, you can click on it, click on the icon. If you want to go to a process, you click on the icon. I don't pretend to know how you would even go about installing one of these things or how much it would cost. But it's a method, it's a way of doing it, which just replaces that big old dusty manual. You've got your website. So currently, of course, it's your shop window. It's a way of getting your customer feedback out with your testimonials. It's a way of previewing your product and showing people what it is that your company does. And so would it be a dreadful idea to have your policy on there, for example? So your policy and your objectives are meant to be communicated, your scope's meant to be communicated, Nothing commercially sensitive is particularly meant to be in your quality manual unless you choose it to be. So if you would put the logo on, for example, to say we've got ISO 9001 2015, then is it that much of a stretch to just put everything else on that you've already invested in your website? Obviously, you wouldn't put your flowcharts of processes and how you do X, Y, and Z, but you can certainly make the statement that you do it, and generally people would have a separate document to house those documents in the workplace anyway. It's pointless being in somebody's office. So it's something to think about. Let's use resources maybe we've already put things towards. The mechanism that you already using to communicate. So Teams, Google, again, I don't profess to be particularly good with technology, but what I would say is these are ideal for uploading documents, for sharing documents. You can have one administrator, you can have separate groups in it, and it just makes things a lot more relevant. And I've probably seen maybe about 7 or 8 clients that are using this method now, and actually they're getting on really well with it and finding that it's actually engaging people a little bit more, but certainly more than the trusty old dusty old manual. You might be getting the impression that not too impressed with manuals at the moment, and it's just literally a case of that. You know, in some respects, it's cost people a lot of money, but it's a little bit outdated in my opinion. So I've tried to put the work in for you, really, and I've broken the standard down. So I've got each section of the manual, and I've got the requirement. So again, you know, it's not a thick book, the standard, is it? But we do end up with reams and reams of paper trying to evidence everything to the last detail. So the caveat, I suppose, with this is that when we go through it, you'll think, oh, I forgot all this paperwork because I don't need it all. The caveat is, though, you must still, even if the standard says that you don't need documented information, be able to provide the auditor with evidence that you are meeting that. And as we go through, we'll be able to sort of chat about ideas, I think, of how you might want to evidence that instead, and still make sure that you're meeting the standard and that you've not refined it too much without including everybody else for your system. So the first section of the standard, the context of the organisation. So generally people will have half a page detailing how the company started, who you are, what you do, and very often what's forgotten is the only piece within that particular section which asks for documented information, and that is the scope. So your scope is what you'll find on the certificate when you register for your standard, and you know, we come out and assess you. We are assessing you against that scope. You'll find it in the bold letters next to 9001 on your certificate, and you must have that documented somewhere within your system. You must also document how you maintain, support the operation of processes, and to provide confidence that the processes work. If we think about it, if you're doing an internal audit, which you have to do, which you also have to document, that's showing an evidence really that you've looked at how are the operation processes supported, are they maintained, are they effective, and your findings for or against, for want of a better phrase, will provide the confidence or not as to whether your processes actually work. Leadership, this is a real offender for copy and pasting the standard and not telling us how you actually lead or what you actually do. The only thing from the leadership section that requires you to have documented information is the policy itself. So your policy, of course, is directly tied in with your objectives. The two go hand in hand and should always be live working documents that often need review. And out of your planning section, it is only the objectives that require to have a documented information. So far we've gone through 3 sections of the standard, and all you've got to document is the scope that's copied off your certificate. We know we've got to do a management review and internal audits, so that's near enough boxed off the second bit. You've got your policy, which you'll have written anyway, and your objectives. And if you want your policy to have your objectives written in it, so be it. The two are interlinked, it makes perfect sense. They are therefore documented. Suddenly you've just reduced, hopefully, a huge amount of paperwork, and we can all be happy bunnies. The next section of the standard is support. So this is all to do with monitoring and measuring resources, fitness for purpose, calibration, evidence of competence, and how you determine documented information as being necessary for the effectiveness of the quality management system, version control. Okay, so if you don't have calibration in your scope, then obviously you're not going to require documented evidence of calibrated equipment. However, when looking at monitoring and measuring of resources and fitness for purpose, this covers a whole range of activities, really, doesn't it? So it might be a case of forklift trucks, loaders. It might be the case of you've identified through management review or internal audits that we might be lacking resources somewhere. So it might be meeting minutes that you want to provide specifically towards this area. Evidence of competence is a fairly easy one, really, because most people will have some form of email or certificate to say that they've attended a training course or some CPD, and it's about how you control as well these things. So when calibration's up for renewal, when somebody's, for example, first aid runs out, how we're controlling the planning of when we would rebook. But the key thing is, if you've got the evidence that somebody is in date, then we don't need to create a massive ream of paper to demonstrate that. And again, most things are electronic now and can just be saved in a file somewhere on your computer. Something that's really key is that it tells us that the company must determine documented information as being necessary for the effectiveness of the QMS. So what does that really tell us? Well, if you want lots of documentation, of course you can have it. If that's how you feel you can best control the management system and help people adhere to it and be aware of it, that's absolutely great. However, if you decide the only documents you want in your management system are the ones that the standard categorically requires and says you shall have, as long as you can evidence that your quality management system is effective, that everybody knows what they're doing, they're aware, they're competent, and that we're checking those processes, then it's really up to the company to decide that. Version control, updating and creating, if you have got a really paper-heavy system, this is where you'll get a lot of findings generally, because with the best will in the world, there will always be somebody who has their one document saved on their desktop or taken around with them on a clipboard that will, you know, be version 2 1999 and everybody else is on version 76 2021. So it's a good idea if you can bring it all into the one place and just have that proper control. And when you audit yourselves, the internal audit of the company, and hopefully you should see a reduction in these uncontrolled documents just flying about everywhere. So it does often happen. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of what I mean by this, because you must be thinking that I've lost my mind a little bit, that all of this with all the reams of paper that you've got can be put in one place. But the caveat is everything we see is confidential and we are impartial as auditors. For the purposes of the webinar, I've created a company myself in an area we just are just so unlikely to audit. And it's literally just to give you an example and a flavour of how your system could look. It's a bit of a ridiculous company, I apologise for that, but if we take away the sentiment behind it, hopefully it may have some value. So this is my quality management system. It's Jude's fantastic company, established 2020. Now this actually shows everything that we've just spoken about. As I say, it's a ridiculous company, a ridiculous idea, but equally, I think it shows that you can apply it to any business. If you can do it to, supplying treats to cats and dogs, we can certainly apply it to real businesses. So, as the standards asked, I've provided my scope, and that's supply of copious amounts of treats to cats and dogs. We've ensured our processes meet our customer needs by receiving feedback, referring to work procedures for standardisation, and internally auditing to ensure processes remain relevant and effective. So this 1, 2, 3, 4 short lines has actually covered section 4 entirely for documented information. Hopefully what you can see there is that, because although I don't have to document interested parties, I have done, just to give you an idea that it can still be quite simple. So I will confess, actually trying to think of interested parties in this setting was quite a challenge, and then it all became quite enjoyable because it is quite ridiculous. But again, it gives you a little bit of a mental exercise there to go and look actually how deep it is. And of course, your companies will have much more. I've then got my quality policy. So I've said that I'm going to commit to ensuring all treats applied to the cats and dogs are suitable for their health and enjoyment. So it's quite clear what the intention is of the system. We'll monitor the satisfaction based on weight and demand from the animals and strive for continuous improvement by thoroughly auditing suppliers to ensure quality is maintained and controlling our processes. I've then tied that into my objectives. So these are SMART. So they're specific to achieve 96% customer satisfaction per annum and measured monthly. So I can actually show evidence to my auditor when they come that we've either achieved that or we've not, and we can look for trends because we've been looking at these on a monthly basis. The next objective, which again ties into my policy directly, is to audit suppliers, ensuring 70% of treats supplied are verified as natural ingredients. So it's perfectly easy for anybody to see whether I've achieved those objectives or whether I haven't. And then probably next year what I'd do, or halfway through the year, is assess, do I need to change them? I've also included section 7 of the standard, and I've decided that the weighing scales will require to be calibrated. So equipment required to be calibrated are food weighing scales to be calibrated before each use. And that's ostensibly my operating instruction for that. Again, it's easy for the auditor to see, and it's easy for anybody who will join my business to know this is what we need to do. I've determined the competencies for anybody who would want to work for me. So they'll need a level 2 in veterinary nursing, and I'll know if they've got that because they'll be able to give me a certificate. Same with the animal first aid and the commercial hygiene as well. So all I would need to do is keep those little documents, scan them in, and we've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. I can set a reminder if I need to check an expiry date, but the key thing is I've documented everything that I need to, and we've covered 4 sections of the standard here. And then I've just bobbed on a little bit of feedback there as well. So since the scales have been calibrated, we notice the treats have reduced in size. Please review your process. So If we were to get serious with it for a little moment, oh, and we've also got document control there at the bottom, got what version, the date, and the date it needs to be reviewed. It's so simple looking, and you know, I have to say I didn't put a huge amount of time into making it look fantastically pretty. But what you've actually got, if you were to think about this method, is if you're at work, it's dead easy to put it up on the wall if you need to. I'm not overwhelmed with information there, but it does tell me what I need to know. And that is all that is required. There's not any findings to be made there unless you have your information unclear or inaccurate about the dates, or if you change the objectives, or if you fail to follow any of these processes. But you could have it as a screensaver on any company laptop. It doesn't take a lot of space, and for a new person coming to work for the company, it tells you exactly what the company's about and what we do. So as silly as it is, it's actually quite an effective way of communicating. So that's the first part of the standard, which generally takes up lots of paper and lots of time. And now we're going to look at the second part, which is operations. So this is the part of the standard which, for want of a better word, can be misunderstood, misinterpreted, but it's actually really good. Okay. So operational planning and control. To have confidence the process has been carried out as planned is the requirement for documented information. Demonstrate conformity of products and services to their requirements. So we might want to consider that's going to be, you know, a quality check, or that we've audited those processes so that we know we have the confidence to plan for any orders that come through the door for us. For requirements for products and services, you'll already be doing this in some way, shape or form. So reviewing customer requirements, ensure any new requirements for products and services. So if we put that into a more relatable language, if you are taking website orders, you'll have a traceability of this. So the system will actually manage it for you itself. You'll have an option, you'll click on it, you'll agree to it. It'll tell somebody who's ordering it, have you got enough stock or not? You're out of stock if there's a waiting time on it. And as you would normally do now, if there's an issue with the customer order, you'll be able to review it, and how else do you know what's coming through to be ordered? So you will already have a documented section of this for yourselves. If your business is subject to design and development, then I would suggest that, again, you're already doing this, so it doesn't really require any additional inputs to how you would normally control a design project. So when we say design, you are creating something, you have designed it. When we say develop, what we mean is that we are taking something from the design and developing it. So mainly engineering, potentially construction, manufacturing may have these in, but again, you'll have most of it already set up. So before we would even consider designing, creating something from new, the first thing you would do, of course, is similar to your customer requirements. Have we got the resources? Have we got what we need? Can we verify it? Can we validate it? How much is the customer going to be involved? What's the level of control? Design reviews and responsibilities. And all of that must be documented, which generally in a design project, you've probably got more than one person involved anyway. You would expect that people would have a copy of this information for review or reminder, for example. You're going to have your document design inputs, and if you work in the area of design and development, which is a huge subject, then you will know what it is. If you, as not many people have it on the scope. I don't want to go on a deep dive into it, but I'm happy to answer any questions should you have any. Document controls. So again, this is, going back to what version, what date, are we accurately reflecting what stage of the project that we're at? Document outputs. So if we've, say done a design for an electric item and we've recorded on the schematics, but we're at version 4 now instead of version 1. What's the changes in the outputs? And of course that leads you to document changes itself. So again, if you work in that field, you'll be very familiar with that format, and it's not actually the standard asking you for anything unusual. But if it's design, yes, it must be documented, and it's fairly obvious as to why. Control of externally provided processes and resources. So what you document is how you control external process and resource, purchased product and suppliers. Okay, so most of you will have an approved suppliers list. Is that how you control them? It might be a case of, you go and look at online reviews. It might be a case of you ask for an ISO 9001 certificate. It might be through referrals. It's up to you how you control it. It's just having that little evidence that there is some control there, and we're not willy-nilly, we'll use this person one week and that person next week, and because I'm best mates with Bob, he never delivers on time or what I want, but I've just kept using him for years and years and years because I don't want to look for anyone else. He's my mate. So that's the purpose of it. And you purchase product as well. So these really go hand in hand. We should be able to trace back items that you need either for stock or to make your product, and then we should be able to see, okay, who have you bought it from and why? What has deemed them to be suitable for your particular business? Production and service provision. Okay, so these 4 points here, exactly what you need documented. So what the job is, what the result is, monitor and measure, competent persons, validation, where calibration not used, and post-delivery activities. So the majority of people will have a quote, then assign a job number or some sort of reference which will relate to that quote. From there, you'll have an instruction for somebody to make or create. It's all things that you're doing. And again, a lot of the time, nowadays, it's all done by technology, managed by a CRM or a tablet to take round, or job packs, which are still quite suitable in paper format. The key is the traceability throughout the documented information, excuse me. If there's any issues with looking after property for customers, wherever you, and any changes. But again, these are things that would be done anyway and don't require lots and lots of paper. It can all be done on one form. Suppose the time that you would take now is if you're going to go electronic, creating that form, what information do you need, what information do you want, and if not, trying to condense maybe from 6 bits of paper to 1. The release of products and services, evidence of conformity and traceability. So it's a quality inspection, isn't it, really? Or just an acknowledgement that that order's ready to go. So it could be a dispatch note that you've created. No bother with that. And then control of the non-conforming outputs. Again, so it might just be your non-conformance sheet, which will describe what it is, who's found it, what's wrong with it, and what have you done about it. But again, it doesn't have to be one of these old forms. It can be however you wish to present it. It could be a flow chart, could be a step-by-step, could be a recorded video. As long as it's documented, however, in some way, that's absolutely fine. This is the forgotten part of the standard review, and that's performance evaluation. Again, all businesses do it, not many are able to show us how you do it regularly and well. What needs to be monitored and measured, and that needs to be recorded. So you might do that in your management review. What have you decided? Doesn't need to be a separate document. You might then sort of think, well, the methods for monitoring and measurement, that might also be in management review in those minutes, so that we can quite clearly see what it is, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and what were the results. There's no requirement for separate documents for those if you're going to put it all in management review. Understandably, internal audits do need to be documented, what your plan is. So the plan for the year that you're doing it, and maybe the plan for the next year after that as well. You need to tell us what the scope of the audit is. So some of you might want to do a full process audit, do the entire system in one day on one document, no problems at all. Some people like to take a bit longer and do a department a month, or a couple in the first half of the year, a few in the next half of the year, and that's how. Again, there's now apps that you can use to reduce your paperwork for this, which if you go to any app store, most of them are free, and that will give you a standardization without actually having to do anything. Just go around, fill out your audit form created by somebody else on your phone or a tablet or a laptop, and that works quite well for people as well. Now, management review, we discuss everything within the standard, don't we? So other than the operations, where you do need paperwork so people know what work they're trying to achieve, it might be said that everything else can go in management review, as long as you can verify where you're getting your data from, where you've got your answers to your objectives, and how you've monitored, how you've measured, how you've looked at results from internal audit. It is still documented, and that's what the standard does, is documented information. Doesn't say where or how. Okay. So bearing all that in mind, and hopefully we can say that we've now reduced half of your quality management system paperwork by cutting a lot of that out. Again, it's how do I evidence this to my auditor? Okay, so the central is the word processes, isn't it? And these are really the processes which are going to be around that we generally look for. We did operations from that really, because we would expect that there has to be a good traceability and documents that go with that. So training starts at a thorough induction and refreshers, which we can evidence. Part of that might be to members of staff, okay, which drops down into awareness, discussion and demonstration. So if we can see the induction was really, really thorough, if you've just brought inductions in, make sure you refresh all of your staff, not just the new people. We can then, because there's no requirement for us to ask for thousands of documents to do with this, and discuss what was your training like, what have you done this year, can you demonstrate the work that you do for us, non-conformance reporting, by showing issues or points for learning, your evidence and utilisation of the system, the effectiveness of the processes. So again, comes back to training, doesn't it? So it's learning from the issues. We should hopefully see an improvement in awareness through, so we documented that non-conformance, but what is it we do with it? We train people so it doesn't happen again, and so we can work better and more efficiently. Corrective action shows improvement, reflection, and reduces the chance of occurrence, okay? So again, linked straight through into training. It's all about the learning. Internal audits provide us with an opportunity to assess the system and see what can be removed and or refined. And you might find too many processes that don't talk to each other, and inefficient use of technology. So we communicate, we've reviewed corrective action, non-conformance, we've talked about it, and we've trained. So everybody is aware up to this point and is now in a good position to actually have a discussion during internal audits and say, well, actually, yeah, we have this one, but actually it holds me up a further 19 minutes a day or what have you. And then we're going to take the results of all of this and discuss it and record it at management review. And from this, solutions might come from KPIs and benchmarks, and then we're going to communicate all of this back through training. So when you're looking at starting to reduce and update the system, planning is absolutely critical, okay? It's got to come from the leadership. You know, that desire to reduce and make life easier for a lot of people, it's got to come from you, and you have to decide, what do you want to get from an internal audit? What do you want to know? The next phase is analysing those results from the internal audit and communicating it with process users. Next, you need to set objectives which are monitored regularly, okay? So we might find we've removed something vital by accident, and that's okay, because as long as we're analysing it and everybody's communicated with the process users, we can actually see, have the objectives been achieved? Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to try and see if there's any questions. Now, forgive me because it's trying to get this thing larger so I can actually read it. Okay, bear with me. We do have a couple of questions. That's good. That means someone was listening. Okay. So, it's technology again, folks. Okay. Wow. Okay, so somebody said, can I ask how you evidence the needs and expectations of interested parties, the new standard requirement? You don't have to evidence it in terms of having it written down. We should be able to talk about that. So if I ask you who's your interested party, for example, I can tell you it's most likely to be my neighbours. If we use the ridiculous idea that, you know, for example, I've clearly got animals, my neighbours are going to be a consideration for noise, or, you know, running around. The insurers are going to be interested parties. I don't have to document them. I should just be able to tell you, and you should be able to have that conversation really for leadership, but you don't need to, you know, have it as a standalone thing. Unless it says shall have documented information, we don't need to be too concerned with it. Okay, we use Tableau for KPIs, Google and all these programs. Never dawned on me to use them for ISO. Great idea, thanks. You're very, very welcome. Okay. Would a CAD system with inbuilt data control meet 8.3 documentation? Do you know, I don't see why it wouldn't. As long as you can show those process outputs and inputs and that you've controlled it, I really don't see why it wouldn't. When you get these slides, if you just check it off against that section that I've pointed out to you. And ensure it does all that. But I mean, CAD, that's the whole purpose of these systems, isn't it? It's a design system to help you do it. Give it a go. And if you need any help or clarification, please get in touch with me and we'll have a look through it. We are a contract manufacturer to our customers who have the sole design control. We've always taken exception to this section. Does it now require compliance to our internal planning of producing the OEM's requirements? Are we now considered the designer or manufacturing? Can we continue to take exception to this section? Okay, contract manufacturer who have the sole design control. Okay, so if you have the sole design control, are you actually designing? Okay. If I understand what you're saying correctly, and I might have misunderstood this, so please get in touch if I'm totally off the word, off the wall. Okay, so you're controlling the design, but you're not actually designing, then yes, you could take exception to that completely. What I would say though is that auditors are not consistent, if I'm honest, on this matter at all, and it might be the case that you still have to fight a little bit. What I can do, if it's of any use to you, is send out a blog that was written by one of my colleagues on design, development and control, which clearly sets out the difference between each, and you could possibly use that as your evidence to ensure that you can continue with that exception. If I make significant changes to my documentation based on what you've said, what's the best way of ensuring it complies? Internal audit, that's the point of them. So you'll have a copy of the slides which will tell you exactly what sections of the standard mention documentation that you shall have. So if you absolutely have those bits of documentation, there is no reason it shouldn't comply. The only caveat with reducing significantly all your documentation is making sure that everybody understands still, and that you can evidence still, that your quality management system is effective and that your processes are understood and effective. That's the only sort of concern that might come up from an auditor if you don't have everything documented. But ultimately, we are assessing your company against, does it meet that standard? And if the standard isn't asking for documented information, then we're not there to tell you should have it. Risk-based thinking, how do you evidence that? Well, the standard doesn't say that you have to produce SWOT and PESTLE. Again, we can have a conversation about that. So when you're talking to the leadership team, we naturally ask, what are your risks? What have been your opportunities this year? How are you managing your risks? We can certainly document in our audit reports that way. Will you be getting a copy of the presentation? Yes, you will. Hello, thank you. This will be a recording. Yes, there will be. Will the presentation? Yeah. Okay. I think I've answered everybody's questions there. If there's anything I've not made clear, or you'd like a little bit more clarification on, or you think of a question later, please get in touch. I'm always more than happy to chat with our clients and people who support us by coming onto these webinars. And I will say thank you very much for your time, attention and attendance. And I'm sure we will see you again soon. Thank you.